19th-century Manhattan was a city of contrasts. Its streets were a mix of wealth and poverty, progress and chaos. While the elite built luxurious mansions along Fifth Avenue, the dark alleys of the Lower East Side were teeming with criminals, immigrants, and those trying to survive in this turbulent metropolis. At a time when the police were poorly organized and forensic science was in its infancy, murders often went unsolved, becoming shrouded in legend and rumor. This story delves into 3 unsolved murders that shook 19th-century Manhattan, leaving behind more questions than answers. The murder of Mary Rogers, 1841. One of the most famous unsolved murders of the 19th century was the murder of Mary Rogers. Nicknamed the Beautiful Cigar Girl, Mary was a young, attractive woman who worked at John Anderson's cigar shop on Broadway. Her beauty attracted customers, including both ordinary workers and wealthy gentlemen. In July 1841, 21-year-old Mary disappeared. 3 days later, her body was found in the Hudson River near Hoboken. She had been strangled and her clothes torn, indicating a violent death. The police at that time were ill-equipped to investigate such cases. In the 1840s, there was no professional detective service in New York, and investigative methods were limited to interviewing witnesses and conducting a superficial examination of the crime scene. Several men were considered suspects, including cigar shop owner John Anderson, who was suspected of having a relationship with Mary, and Daniel Payne, her fiancé. Payne had an alibi, but committed suicide a few months after the murder, which only fueled rumors of his involvement. Another theory linked the murder to underground abortion clinics. At the time, abortions were illegal but flourished in the shadows. Some speculated that Mary had gone to such a clinic, where she was the victim of a botched procedure or violence. However, none of these theories were proven due to a lack of evidence. The case was complicated by the fact that the press, particularly newspapers such as the New York Herald, sensationalized the story by publishing gossip and fabrications, which confused the investigation. This case inspired Edgar Allan Poe to write the short story, The Mystery of Marie Roget, 1842, in which he attempted to solve the mystery using logic and deduction. However, even Poe was unable to shed light on the truth. The murder of Mary Rogers remained unsolved, becoming a symbol of the dark side of Manhattan, where beauty and youth could be fatal. The Bond Street Murder, 1857. In January 1857, Manhattan was shaken by another brutal murder, which became known as the Bond Street Tragedy. Dr. Harvey Barrow, a successful dentist, was found dead in his office at 31 Bond Street. He had been shot, and there were signs of a struggle in the room. Barrow was a respected man, but it turned out he had enemies. His business reputation had been tarnished by rumors of fraud, and his personal life had been marred by scandals involving extramarital affairs. The investigation was complicated by the fact that the killer left no obvious clues. The police assumed that the crime could be related to Barrow's financial machinations. One of the main suspects was his business partner, Edward Crane, who had a conflict with Barrow over debts. However, Crane had an ironclad alibi, confirmed by several witnesses. Another version pointed to the jealous husband of one of Barrow's mistresses, but this lead also came to nothing due to a lack of evidence. At that time, the Manhattan police began to use the first methods of forensics, including bloodstain analysis and ballistic research. However, these methods were so primitive that they did not yield any results. The newspapers, as in the case of Mary Rogers, sensationalized the story, publishing theories about secret societies and conspiracies. The case was never solved, and the house at 31 Bond Street gained a reputation as cursed. Residents claimed to hear footsteps and screams at night, which only added to the mystical aura surrounding the story. Translated with Deep L. Com, free version. The 5 Points Murder, 1870. The third murder we will examine took place in the notorious 5 Points neighborhood, the crime capital of Manhattan. In 1870, the body of a young Irish immigrant, Patrick O'Connor, was found in one of the alleys. He had been stabbed to death, and his wallet and watch were missing, suggesting robbery. However, a local priest who knew Patrick claimed that he had no valuables on him, which made the motive for robbery questionable. In the 19th century, 5 Points was the most dangerous neighborhood in New York City. Gangs such as the Bowery Boys and the Dead Rabbits flourished there, fighting for control of the territory. The police rarely intervened in the neighborhood, considering it hopeless. The investigation into O'Connor's murder was superficial. Several witnesses reported seeing Patrick arguing with an unknown man the day before, but no one was able to identify him. One theory linked the murder to gang activity. O'Connor was believed to be a courier for one of the gangs and may have crossed paths with rivals. Another theory pointed to personal revenge. Patrick had a reputation as a gambler and may have failed to repay a debt. However, due to the chaos in 5 Points and the fear of witnesses to tell the truth, the investigation quickly reached a dead end. This case was typical for 5 Points, where murders occurred almost daily, and most of them remained unsolved. The residents of the neighborhood were accustomed to violence, and O'Connor's death was quickly forgotten, becoming just one of the many tragedies of the place. Why did these crimes remain unsolved? The unsolved murders of 19th-century Manhattan reflect the realities of the time. First, the police were poorly organized. In the 1840s, New York City had only just begun to establish a municipal police force, but it was corrupt and ineffective. There were no detectives as such, and investigations often boiled down to bribes or pressure on witnesses. Second, forensics was in its infancy. Although the first methods of fingerprint analysis and ballistics appeared by the end of the century, most cases relied on eyewitness testimony, which was often unreliable. In the case of Mary Rogers, for example, witnesses were confused about the details, and in the Beryl case, they were unable to accurately identify the type of weapon. Third, the social context played a huge role. In 5 Points, the police rarely investigated due to fear of gangs and a lack of resources. In the cases of Mary Rogers and Beryl, the press complicated the work by inflating rumors and distracting attention from the facts. In addition, class bias influenced the prioritization of cases. Murders of poor people, such as O'Connor, were often ignored, while the deaths of wealthy people, such as Beryl, attracted more attention. The legacy of unsolved cases. These murders left a deep mark on Manhattan's culture. They highlighted the vulnerability of a city where wealth and poverty existed side by side, and justice was out of reach for many. The story of Mary Rogers inspired not only Edgar Allan Poe, but also other writers who saw in it a symbol of the tragic fate of young women in the big city. The Bond Street tragedy became the basis for numerous urban legends, and the 5 Points murder highlighted the brutality of life in the poorest neighborhoods. These cases also influenced the development of policing and criminalistics. At the end of the 19th century, New York began to create professional detective units, and investigative methods became more scientific. Although these changes came too late for Mary, Harvey, and Patrick, they helped solve many crimes in the following century. Epilogue. 19th century Manhattan was a city of opportunity and danger. The unsolved murders of Mary Rogers, Harvey Beryl, and Patrick O'Connor are just the tip of the iceberg. As hundreds of other crimes remained in the shadows, these stories remind us that even in the city that never sleeps, the truth may remain hidden forever. Their secrets, shrouded in the fog of the Hudson and the noise of the streets, continue to stir the imagination, leaving us with the question, will we ever know what really happened? Translated with DeepL, free version.